From now on, I think it'll be easier if your paycheck just goes directly into my account, my son said, stirring his coffee as if he were commenting on the weather. It was a gray Thursday afternoon in late October, the kind of Wisconsin day when the sky looked like brushed steel, and the air smelled faintly of burning leaves. I sat across from him in my kitchen, my hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold long ago. Daniel didn't look nervous. If anything, he looked confident, too confident for a man asking his mother to hand over her financial life. He said it with that professional calm he'd perfected since becoming a financial consultant in Milwaukee, as if what he was suggesting was standard procedure. "It's just practical," he continued. "You know how complicated online banking can be these days. I could handle everything for you: bills, taxes, transfers. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." He smiled as he said it, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. I just watched him, searching his face for some sign of the boy I had raised alone after his father died in that factory accident 30 years ago. I wanted to find warmth in his expression, but all I saw was a certain distance, a faint impatience, like a man trying to close a business deal with a difficult client. Finally, I asked softly, "And you'd have access to all my accounts?" "Of course," he said, as if that were obvious. "It'll make things smoother for both of us. You can trust me, Mom." I took a slow breath. The word trust settled heavily in the air between us. Once upon a time, I would have signed anything he handed me without a second thought. But now, something in his tone too rehearsed, too formal, sent a cold ripple through me. "I see," I said quietly, forcing a small smile. "That sounds reasonable." His expression brightened. He leaned forward and gave me one of those quick, mechanical kisses on the forehead he'd learned from his wife Kayla, gestures that looked affectionate but felt like performance. "You'll see, Mom," he said, rising from the chair. "It's for your own good." That phrase, "for your own good," hung in the air long after he left, echoing through the empty kitchen like the ticking of the wall clock. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the dry corn stalks in the field beyond my window. I stared at the half-empty mug in front of me and realized I hadn't actually agreed, I'd simply gone quiet. But silence, I reminded myself, was sometimes more powerful than words. That night, I lay awake, listening to the creaking of the old farmhouse, thinking about how easily Daniel had spoken, how confident he'd been, and how little hesitation he'd shown in asking for control over my life. Something in me shifted that night, something old and instinctive. The part of me that had once survived widowhood, debt, and exhaustion woke up again. If Daniel wanted control, he'd soon learn that I had my own plans, and that I was far from done. Friday came, cold and wind-stung, the kind of evening when the trees around my farmhouse leaned under the weight of November. I spent the whole day quietly moving things around, packing, cleaning, rearranging. By the time the sun disappeared behind the barn, half the house looked bare. The living room had no sofa, no TV, not even curtains, just my old rocking chair and the scent of lemon oil on the wooden floor. I wasn't losing my mind. I was running a test. For the past 3 years, Daniel and his wife, Kayla, had shown up every Friday evening without fail. They never called ahead. They never asked if I had plans. They'd simply arrive around 6, expecting dinner to be ready, their table set, their wine glasses clean, their comfort guaranteed. It had started as something sweet. "We just want to keep you company," Kayla would say, handing me her empty plate after dinner. But the truth was simpler. They came to eat, not to visit. That night, when I heard Daniel's car crunch over the gravel driveway, I wiped my hands on a towel and sat down in the chair. My heart beat so loudly it seemed to echo through the empty room. "Mom!" Daniel called as the front door opened. His voice was cheerful, full of that false warmth he reserved for other people's mothers. "We're here." Then came the pause, the silence. A moment later, Kayla's voice cut through the house, high, sharp, full of shock. "Daniel, what on earth happened in here?" Their footsteps thundered down the hall. Daniel appeared first, his eyes wide, scanning the stripped room like a man surveying the scene of a crime. Kayla followed, clutching her purse, as though thieves might still be lurking. "Mom," Daniel said, his tone shifting instantly from confusion to alarm. "Where's everything? The couch? The TV? The dining table?" I looked up at him calmly. "I sold some things," I said softly. "I thought I should have a little cash on hand before transferring my money into your account." For a second, there was only silence. Then Daniel's face reddened, his jaw tightening. "You what?" Kayla's eyes narrowed. "You sold your furniture? Why would you do that?" I smiled faintly. "Because I wanted to see what mattered more to you. The things in this house, or me." Daniel's nostrils flared. "You're being ridiculous. How are we supposed to watch TV when we come over now? How are we supposed to be comfortable?" The words landed like knives. We. Comfortable. Not once did he say you. I rose from my chair slowly, the wooden floor creaking beneath my feet. "Daniel," I said quietly, "if you were worried about my comfort, you wouldn't be standing here shouting about furniture." He took a step closer, eyes blazing. "You're acting crazy. Maybe you really do need someone to handle things for you." Kayla crossed her arms. "We only come here to make sure you're okay. And this is how you repay us? Selling everything? It's selfish." Selfish. The same word his father had used years ago when I refused to lend him my savings. Something cold and clean settled inside me. "Dinner's not ready," I said, "and it won't be. If you're hungry, you can find somewhere else to eat." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the wind outside, pushing at the windows. Daniel stared at me as though he'd just seen a stranger. Then, with a voice stripped of emotion, he said, "Be careful, Mom. A woman alone without family. It's easy for things to go wrong." The warning lingered long after they slammed the door and their car disappeared down the gravel road. I stood in the empty house, the silence humming with something fierce and final. It wasn't fear. It wasn't grief. It was the beginning of clarity. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of Daniel's plan. It was only the start of mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the old maple trees, brushing against the windows like restless hands, and I lay there listening to every sound of the house that I had built, with decades of labor and quiet sacrifice. It's strange how a single evening can make you revisit an entire lifetime. When Daniel called me crazy, it was like an echo from the past, a voice that dragged me back to where everything began. I was 29 when Tom, my husband, died in that mill accident. It was February 1992, and the snow outside the hospital window looked almost blue under the fluorescent lights. They handed me his wedding ring in a paper envelope. Daniel was only 3. I remember going home that night, holding him in my arms, promising myself that no matter what, I would give him a good life. For years, that promise became the axis around which my world turned. I worked days at the local library in Baraboo, then cleaned offices at the courthouse at night. I came home after midnight, hands raw from bleach, often too tired to eat. But Daniel never went without. When he was 10, he wanted new sneakers, Nike, blue and silver. They cost nearly as much as a week's groceries. I bought them anyway. He wore them to school the next day, beaming. That smile made every aching muscle worth it. Later, when he wanted to join the summer robotics camp, I sold my mother's old jewelry to pay the fee. He never knew that. At 18, Daniel got accepted to a private business college in Chicago. I didn't have the tuition money, but I refused to let him settle for less. I mortgaged the house, the very same farmhouse we lived in now, to cover his education. I told him it was an investment in his future. He promised he'd pay it back someday. He graduated at 23, standing tall in his navy gown, shaking hands with the dean. I remember crying through the ceremony, not because I was proud, though I was, but because I was so relieved I could finally stop fighting so hard. I thought the hardest years were behind us. But when he came home, something had changed. He moved back in for a little while, he said, to save money before finding his own place. That little while turned into 5 years. I paid the bills. I cooked. I even let him use my car because his wasn't reliable. He worked for a financial firm downtown and saved every penny. When he finally moved out, he bought a modern condo in Milwaukee, paid in cash. I remember helping him pack, folding his shirts while he checked his emails. He hugged me quickly and said, "Don't worry, Mom, you'll always be taken care of." At the time, I thought he meant he'd look after me. Now I realize he meant he'd take control of me. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to the whisper of the wind against the windows, a thought surfaced that chilled me more than the cold Wisconsin air. Maybe my son had been preparing for this moment, not for weeks or months, but for years. The following Monday, the air carried the bite of approaching winter. Frost clung to the edges of my windows, and every breath inside the farmhouse felt heavier, sharper. I made myself a cup of tea, but it tasted like dust. I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel's face that night, the anger, the threat behind his smile. I needed to know the truth. So, I took the early bus to town and walked straight into Summit Community Bank, the small local branch I'd used for nearly 30 years. The teller, a young woman named Lindsay, recognized me. "Good morning, Mrs. Morris," she said kindly. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to review my account history," I said. My voice trembled, but I kept it steady. "For the last 6 months, please. Every transaction." Lindsay printed the pages and handed them over. I sat down in the waiting area and began reading. It didn't take long. Halfway down the first page, my eyes stopped at a withdrawal $1,200, taken out 3 months earlier. The location, Milwaukee. I hadn't been to Milwaukee in years. I felt my throat close. "Excuse me," I whispered. "Can you tell me more about this withdrawal?" Lindsay leaned closer, lowering her voice. "It was made with your debit card in person at our Milwaukee branch. Do you still have that card?" I opened my purse and pulled it out. "It's been with me the whole time." She frowned. "That's unusual. The system shows your PIN was entered correctly." And suddenly, I remembered. 3 months ago, Daniel had shown up unexpectedly. I was in the shower when he arrived. I'd shouted for him to come in, and he waited in the living room. My purse, my card had been right there. I thanked Lindsay, folded the papers, and walked out into the cold. My knees felt weak. The world seemed tilted, as if the ground beneath me had shifted. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table, spreading out every old bank statement I could find. I looked through them one by one, marking every transaction I didn't recognize. Soon, the table was littered with yellow notes and highlighter marks. There were more $600, $900, even a credit card payment to a company I didn't remember signing up for. The statement listed Home Pro Design Center, Milwaukee. Daniel had renovated his condo last year. I had complimented him on how beautiful it looked, the granite counters, the oak cabinets. He'd smiled and said, "It's all hard work, Mom." But the numbers on the page told a different story. I pressed my hands to my face. The betrayal burned deep, not just because of the money, but because of how casually he had done it. When I finally lifted my head, the daylight outside had faded to gray. The clock ticked loudly, filling the silence. That's when headlights swept across my window, slow, deliberate. Daniel's black SUV. He didn't knock. He just sat there for a minute before driving away. It wasn't a visit. It was a warning. And I understood then that my son wasn't just greedy, he was watching me. I stayed awake the entire night, every sound amplified in the quiet house. By morning, I'd made my decision. If Daniel wanted a war over my life, then I would fight it my way, quietly, carefully, completely. The next morning, the first snow of the season fell across the Wisconsin hills. It dusted the fields like powdered sugar, soft and deceptive, just like Daniel's charm. I watched it from my kitchen window, holding a folder of papers so tightly my knuckles went white. Inside that folder were the printouts from the bank, the suspicious transactions, and the receipts I dug up the night before. Each page felt like a wound. But I wasn't going to bleed quietly. By 10 a.m., I was standing in a small office on Jefferson Street in downtown Madison. The glass door read, Raymond A.P.T., attorney at law. He wasn't what I expected, no slick suit or expensive pen. Just a calm man in his 50s, with warm eyes and a patient voice that carried the kind of stillness you only find in people who've seen too much. He listened without interrupting as I told him everything from Daniel's proposal about handling my money to the Friday night outburst to the mysterious withdrawals. When I finished, he sat back, his fingers steepled under his chin. Mrs. Morris, he said gently, what you're describing isn't confusion or family disagreement. It's financial fraud, and it's considered a form of elder abuse under Wisconsin law. The words hit me harder than I expected. Fraud. Abuse. I had spent a lifetime avoiding those words. They belonged to strangers on the news, not to my own son. He continued, do not sign anything your son gives you. Not a form, not a note, nothing. We'll start by securing your finances. I'll help you open a new account, one he doesn't know exists. Then we'll document every single incident. I nodded, fighting the sting behind my eyes. I don't want to ruin his life, I said softly. I just want mine back. Mr. Lee smiled sadly. Sometimes protecting yourself isn't about revenge, it's about survival. That afternoon, we opened a new savings account under legal confidentiality. I changed every password, every PIN, every email. It felt like building a fortress brick by brick, one that had been missing my entire life. That evening, as I brewed tea, my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then, I answered. Mom, he said. His voice was unusually flat. You went to the bank today. My heart stopped. How do you know that? He laughed, a low, joyless sound. You forget, I work with numbers. I get alerts when linked accounts move. Linked accounts? I whispered. You shouldn't have any linked accounts with me. He didn't respond right away. Then, almost playfully, you should really trust me, Mom. You're not as careful as you think. When the call ended, I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. He knew. He was watching. But what he didn't know was that I had already changed everything. The account, the passwords, even the locks on my doors. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the snow swirling outside the window. I wasn't the woman he thought he could manipulate anymore. I wasn't just someone's mother. I was a woman who had survived poverty, widowhood, and decades of quiet battles. And I was about to fight back with patience, precision, and a truth he could never twist. 3 days later, the storm came. The sky above Baraboo turned the color of bruised steel, and thunder rolled across the valley like a warning. I had just finished locking the back door when I saw Daniel's black SUV pull into the driveway, its headlights cutting through the curtain of rain. Kayla was in the passenger seat, her hair perfect even in the storm. They didn't call first. They never did. The doorbell rang 3 times sharp, demanding. I took a breath, straightened my cardigan, and opened the door only halfway. "Mom, what's going on?" Daniel's tone wasn't concern, it was command. Rain streaked down his coat as he stared at me. "Why are you doing this? Why did you move your accounts? Why are you talking to lawyers?" So he knew. Of course he did. I met his gaze. "You've been taking money from me for years, Daniel. And I have proof." His eyes flickered. Just for a second. Then his face hardened. "That's ridiculous. You're confused." Kayla stepped forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "Helen, you're under a lot of stress. Daniel told me you've been acting paranoid. He's only trying to help." I didn't move. "Help? Is that what you call opening credit cards in my name? Taking out loans? Using my money for your renovations?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." I held up the folder. The papers inside were neatly organized, every withdrawal, every unauthorized purchase, every false signature. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Lightning flashed behind him, lighting up his face like a photograph. For the first time, I saw something raw there, fear. "You can't prove it was me," he said, but his voice wavered. "I don't have to," I replied. "The bank already did." Kayla scoffed, though her hand gripped her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. "You wouldn't dare report your own son." "I already have." The words came out steady, cold, final. Daniel took a step closer, towering over me. "You think you can ruin my life, after everything I've done for you? Done for me?" My voice rose for the first time, cutting through the storm. "You stole from me, lied to me, used me like an ATM you could control. I gave you everything, Daniel, my youth, my health, my home. But I will not give you my dignity." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain hammering the porch roof. Then Daniel laughed a harsh, bitter sound. "You'll regret this. You're old, alone, and no one's going to believe your story." I looked him dead in the eyes. "They will when they see the evidence, and when they hear the recordings." He froze. "What recordings?" I smiled faintly. "You should have been more careful when you called me last week." Kayla